The winds of Wyoming were alive that night, howling like a beast in the wild. Holloway Ranch stood against the storm, a solitary figure in a sea of snow and howling wind. The night felt cold, not just from the winter, but from the emptiness that filled the cabin. Inside, Rhett Holloway, the widowed rancher, sat with his daughter in his arms. The baby, barely 8 months old, let out soft sobs, her tiny body racked with the grief that had been haunting her since the death of her mother. It was an ache that Rhett knew all too well. The fire in the hearth crackled, but the warmth couldn't banish the chill in the room. The wind outside rattled the windows, its cry filling the cabin. The moon hung low in the sky, hidden behind a blanket of clouds, casting shadows that seemed to creep across the room like ghosts. The stillness inside felt suffocating, broken only by the sound of his baby's cries. Suddenly, a sharp knock pierced the silence. 3 knocks, deliberate and firm. It wasn't the kind of knock you'd expect in the dead of winter. It was hesitant, almost as if whoever was on the other side of that door wasn't sure they should be there. Another knock followed. The wind outside intensified, but the sound of those knocks cut through the storm. Rhett frowned, unsure of who could be outside at this hour. It was well past midnight, and the storm made it nearly impossible to see anything beyond a few feet. Who would dare come to a remote ranch in the middle of a Wyoming snowstorm, especially at this hour? His heart began to race. He shifted his daughter to his shoulder, her cries growing louder, and slowly walked to the door. He reached for the pistol resting on the mantel, his fingers brushing the cold metal. As he opened the door, the wind rushed in, freezing the small crack that now separated him from whatever lay outside. What he saw, however, wasn't what he expected. The mysterious visitor. The woman stood in the doorway, her appearance as weathered and worn as the land outside. Her hair, wild and tangled by the fierce winds, was hidden beneath a shawl, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she had walked miles in the storm, her dress torn at the hem and soaked through with snow. Yet, it wasn't the cold that made her tremble. Her body was stiff, exhausted, from what appeared to be a long journey through the elements. "I can work," she said, her voice raspy and strained. "I don't want charity." Her words were quiet, but there was an undeniable urgency in her tone. She was asking for something, but what? Her hands were empty except for a small canvas sack, barely clutched between her fingers. No wagon, no horse, nothing but the sack that appeared to hold what little she had left. Rhett's eyes narrowed as he took her in. She wasn't asking for handouts. There was no pleading in her eyes, only a quiet determination. But he couldn't ignore the deep skepticism that tugged at him. In these parts, people came and went, some with real needs, others with less honest intentions. A weary stranger wasn't something he hadn't seen before, but something about her felt different. His baby's cries pierced the still night air, a reminder of the responsibilities that weighed on him. Should he trust her? Could he afford to? His life had been reduced to caring for his daughter and keeping the ranch alive. There wasn't room for more strangers, no matter how badly they needed help. Rhett glanced behind her, scanning the dark for any sign of a wagon or a horse. There was nothing, only the howling wind and the endless white of the snowstorm. He thought of his daughter, still crying in his arms, and felt the familiar coldness settle in his chest. The weight of his wife's absence was heavy, but it was a weight he had learned to carry. What could this woman possibly bring to his life except more complications? The decision to help. Rhett stood there for a long moment, holding the door open, his mind swirling with doubt. He had seen too many strangers in his life, some honest, others not. He knew what it was like to be burned by trust, to let someone in only to have them turn on you. But this woman wasn't like the others. There was a raw honesty in her eyes, a weariness that was more than just the cold. She was running from something, but what? And did it matter? The wind howled louder, biting at his skin, and the baby's cries broke his thoughts. As much as he wanted to shut the door and retreat back to the safety of the cabin, he couldn't. His wife's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of a time when they had shared everything, both their joys and their burdens. She had been the warmth in his life, the one who had always believed that even in the harshest winters, there was room for kindness. "Don't become stone when someone else might need warmth." The words rang in his ears, and suddenly, Rhett's resolve crumbled. He turned on his heel, grabbed his coat, and headed out into the storm. Outside, the woman had collapsed in the snow, her body too weak to stand. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and she was half buried in the snow, clutching her sack like it was the only thing that mattered. Rhett cursed under his breath, his heart pounding in his chest as he rushed to her side. Without thinking, he scooped her up, one arm holding his baby and the other wrapping around the woman's fragile form. He didn't know what to do with her, didn't know what this choice would lead to, but in that moment, he couldn't leave her out in the cold. A warm fire and a shared silence. Back inside, the fire crackled as Rhett laid the woman gently on the old leather couch, the warmth of the flames fighting against the chill that had seeped into her bones. He pulled off her boots, which were soaked through with snow, and watched her carefully as she drifted into an exhausted sleep. She was too thin, too fragile, and yet there was something about her presence that filled the room. He didn't trust her, he couldn't, but there was something in the way she carried herself, something that hinted at a deeper strength. Rhett turned his attention back to his daughter, still crying in his arms. He rocked her slowly, the rhythmic motion offering little comfort. He was alone in this world now, save for the baby. The loneliness felt endless at times, and no matter how hard he tried to stay distant from everyone, a part of him still longed for connection. It wasn't that he wanted another person in his life, it was just that, in his heart, he had never stopped needing someone. The storm raged outside, but inside, the fire warmed the room. As he watched the woman sleep, her features softened by the warmth of the flames, Rhett couldn't help but wonder what she was running from. What kind of life had she lived to find herself here, at the mercy of the cold and the storm? She wasn't the solution to his loneliness, but there was something about her, something that made him feel as if he wasn't the only one fighting to survive. New beginnings. The morning sun crept through the frosted windows of the cabin, its weak rays barely making it past the snowstorm still swirling outside. The warmth of the fire had taken the edge off the cold, but there was still a chill in the air. Willa, as the woman had introduced herself, woke up slowly, her eyes fluttering open to find a strange, comforting warmth surrounding her. For a moment, she didn't recognize where she was. Her arms were cradling something soft and warm, and when she looked down, she saw the baby Rhett's daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. The child's tiny chest rose and fell with the soft rhythm of sleep. Her small hand curled around the edge of Willa's worn shawl. Willa blinked, surprised. She had never been around children, especially one so young, but there was something calming about holding this baby. She didn't know what it was, maybe the sense of responsibility, or the fact that in her arms, she felt connected to something pure, something untouched by the harshness of the world. Rhett was standing in the doorway, watching her. He said nothing, but the look in his eyes told Willa everything she needed to know. She was no longer a stranger in his house. The baby had found comfort in her arms, and that had bridged a gap between them. She gently shifted the baby from her arms and placed her back in the crib, being careful not to disturb her. As she stood up, Rhett moved towards her, and without a word, handed her a pair of worn boots. "You'll need these," he said. His voice was rough, but there was a softness to it now, a hint of the man who had once been kind. Willa took the boots, her hands trembling slightly as she ran her fingers over the worn leather. She didn't need to be told what to do, she already knew. The ranch needed work, and she would do it. It wasn't charity she wanted. And it wasn't pity, it was purpose. She pulled on the boots, laced them up, and then got to work, quietly moving through the cabin and doing what she could. It was only when Rhett left the room that she paused for a moment, her gaze lingering on the crib where the baby slept. Was this a new beginning, or was it just another chapter in a life of endless survival? The growing bond days passed, and the Holloway Ranch began to change. The silence that had filled the cabin for so long was replaced by the sound of movement, soft footsteps on creaky floors, the gentle hum of a lullaby, the crackling of firewood as it burned. Willa's presence in the house transformed it in ways that Rhett hadn't expected. She didn't just clean or cook, she brought life to the place. Every morning, she would wake early, preparing breakfast with the quiet precision of someone who had learned to survive by their own means. She sang softly as she worked, a song that was unfamiliar to Rhett but filled the house with a quiet peace. The baby, who had once cried incessantly, now giggled, reaching out for Willa with growing strength. There was an ease between them now, an unspoken understanding. Rhett watched all of this from the shadows, at first hesitant to fully engage. He was still wrapped in the memories of his wife, his heart bound in grief that refused to release him. But over time, the walls he had built around himself began to crumble. He saw the way Willa cared for the baby, the tenderness in her eyes, the way she cradled the child as though she had always been meant to do so. She wasn't just a woman who had stumbled into his life, she had become a part of it. At night, after the baby had been rocked to sleep, Rhett found himself lingering in the doorway, watching as Willa worked quietly. She didn't ask for anything, and that made her presence even more powerful. The quiet moments they shared, those moments without words, spoke volumes. Rhett knew that he was starting to trust her, something he hadn't done in years. Willa's growing bond with the child made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe they were both healing in their own way. Rhett didn't know if it was love or simply the comfort of finding someone who understood the silent ache of the world they lived in. But whatever it was real, and it was something he hadn't known he needed until now. A shared past, unspoken pain. The days grew colder, and the nights longer. The bond between Rhett and Willa grew stronger, but there were still moments when a shadow passed over her. At night, when the fire had dimmed and the house was quiet, Willa would wake up in a cold sweat, her dreams haunted by a man, someone she had tried to forget. His face was blurry in her dreams, but the pain he had caused her sister was vivid and clear. The memories of him, of the violence, were impossible to escape. Rhett heard her cries in the middle of the night. He didn't open the door, didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't know what to say. He only knew that the sound of her sobs, so quiet, so full of pain, cut through the stillness of the night, leaving a mark on him. There was something about her, something broken, that made him feel like he needed to fix it. But how? How could he help someone who had been through so much? Willa didn't speak of her past, not to Rhett, not to anyone. It was clear that the weight of it still pressed down on her, but she carried it silently, never asking for help, never explaining. She simply kept moving, doing the work that needed to be done. The way she held the baby, the way she worked the land, it was all part of the woman she was becoming. She wasn't just surviving, she was healing. But the pain of her past was a constant shadow, lingering just beneath the surface. Rhett didn't push. He knew that some things couldn't be fixed, and that sometimes healing came slowly, one day at a time. But the more time they spent together, the more he realized that he wasn't just watching her heal, he was healing, too. The outside world encroaches. The peace at Holloway Ranch didn't last forever. In town, whispers began to spread. People talked about Willa, about the strange woman living with the widowed rancher. The gossip was quiet at first, but as time passed, it grew louder. Some said she was hiding something. Others claimed she had killed her husband or ran away from something much darker. The rumors were fueled by fear and suspicion, and though Willa tried to ignore them, the weight of them pressed down on her. One afternoon, a man rode up to the ranch. He was tall, with a weathered face and a cold stare that seemed to pierce right through Willa. Rhett was in the barn, working on the fence, and Willa was in the garden, collecting herbs. The man approached her without introduction, his voice harsh. "You're the one raising his child?" he asked, his words carrying the weight of judgment. "A killer raising a baby. Does that seem right to you?" Willa didn't flinch. She didn't react. She simply stood there, her hands trembling slightly as she held onto the basket of herbs. She knew the truth, and she knew that no matter what anyone said, it wouldn't change who she was or what she had done. But the whispers hurt, and they made her question whether she truly belonged here. Rhett heard the man's voice and came out from the barn. He didn't look at the stranger. His eyes were focused on Willa. There was a quiet understanding between them. He didn't need to explain. He didn't need to tell Willa that he trusted her. She knew, and in that moment, they both understood something important. Whatever the world outside thought didn't matter. They had found something real, something worth protecting, the test of trust. A few days later, a boy from the town went missing in the snow. The storm had returned, fiercer than before, and the temperature had dropped. People were frightened. The boy had been playing near the woods when he disappeared. Panic spread quickly through the town, but when Rhett heard the news, he knew he couldn't just sit back. Willa, without hesitation, grabbed the lantern and headed out into the storm. Rhett tried to stop her, but she was already gone. His heart raced as he watched her disappear into the snow, her figure swallowed by the storm. He had no choice but to follow. The two of them searched through the night, the wind biting at their skin, the snow stinging their faces. When they finally found the boy, he was trapped in an old shack, cold and shivering but alive. Without a second thought, Willa rushed to him, her hands trembling as she pulled him free from the wreckage. The beams creaked above them, and the roof groaned under the weight of the storm, but Willa didn't hesitate. She saved the boy. Rhett watched in awe, his heart swelling with pride. He had seen the strength in her before, but this was different. This was courage, real courage, the kind that saved lives. And in that moment, Rhett knew he could never look at her the same way again. A new beginning. The storm finally relented, leaving behind a world blanketed in deep, silent snow. The wind, once fierce and unyielding, had softened, leaving only the quiet crunch of boots in the snow to break the stillness. Inside the Holloway ranch, the fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, casting the room in a soft orange glow. Rhett stood by the window, his arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon. His mind was a mix of thoughts, all swirling around the events of the past few weeks. The cold from outside had crept into his bones, but something had changed. Something that wasn't just about the weather. Willa had saved the boy. The trust she had earned, with nothing but her actions, had transformed something inside of him. He had trusted her. And the moment he had seen her, standing tall against the storm, holding that child, had made him realize just how much he had begun to rely on her. She wasn't just someone helping him with the ranch. She wasn't just a stranger he'd taken in for a night. Willa had become a part of his life in ways he hadn't expected. As he stood there, watching the landscape outside, his daughter's laughter echoed in his ears. May was crawling across the floor, giggling and reaching for Willa, who was sitting by the fire, her back to Rhett. The warmth between them was palpable. May's cries had faded into soft giggles since Willa had entered their lives, and it was a rhythm that had replaced the tension in the house. The house, which had once felt like a hollow shell, now hummed with life again. Willa, too, had changed. She had started to open up, little by little, though the past still haunted her. Rhett knew that she carried it with her, the burden of whatever had happened before she came to Holloway Ranch. But he had learned to trust her, not because she had told him her story, but because of what she had shown him through her actions. She was strong, compassionate, and fiercely protective, not just of the baby, but of him, too. Rhett walked across the room, his boots silent against the wooden floor, and stood by the fire. Willa didn't look up. She was focused on May, her hands gently coaxing the baby to stand, guiding her with patience. "I've been thinking," Rhett finally spoke, his voice low. Willa turned, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The words Rhett had been holding back for so long, words he had never thought he would say, hung in the air between them. "I don't want you to leave," he said, his voice steady. There was no hesitation now, no walls between them. Willa's expression softened, and she gave him a small nod. "I'm not going anywhere." The simple truth in her words felt like a weight lifting from Rhett's chest. He had known, deep down, that this was where she belonged, where they all belonged. The next morning, as the sun began to rise and cast a golden hue over the snow-covered ground, the ranch felt different. There was warmth in the air that hadn't been there before. There was a new sense of purpose, of belonging. Rhett and Willa stood together, side by side, as the baby giggled at their feet. The future was uncertain, as it always had been, but for the first time, the uncertainty felt less like a threat and more like a possibility. In that moment, as they stood together, Rhett realized that the ranch had become more than just a place to survive. It had become a home, not just because of the walls that kept the cold out, but because of the people inside it, people who had found their way to each other against all odds and had chosen to stay. The months passed, and with them, a new rhythm settled into the Holloway Ranch. Willa had become more than just a caretaker. She had become a mother figure, not just to the baby, but to the ranch itself. The work was hard, but the peace they had found in each other made it worth it. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. They were building a life together, brick by brick, trust by trust. And then one day, as the warmth of spring began to melt the snow, a visitor arrived at the ranch, a young man from the next county, with ink-stained fingers and curious eyes. He had heard the story of the ranch and was eager to learn more about the woman who had become the heart of it all. He asked Rhett, over a cup of coffee, why he had let Willa stay. Rhett looked out the window, watching Willa and the baby in the yard, their laughter carrying in the breeze. "Because she knocked," Rhett said simply, "and I opened, and the wind stopped blowing since." The young man nodded, as if he understood. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But Rhett didn't need to explain any further. The story of how Willa came to be a part of their lives wasn't important anymore. What mattered was that she had stayed, and together they had built something that couldn't be broken by rumors, by hardship, or by the storms of the past. As the sun set over the ranch, casting a soft glow over the land, Rhett stood by the window, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Willa stood beside him, their hands touching for the first time in a long while. The baby was asleep in her crib, a peaceful expression on her face. For the first time in years, Rhett felt like the future was bright, like no matter what came their way, they would face it together. And that, he realized, was all that mattered.